So, okay, welcome back to another Between the Pages book chat. We've been off for a couple of weeks due to holidays and other things, but we are back today with author J.V. Hilliard, and we're going to be discussing his book, The Last Keeper, which is book one in the Warminster saga. And I'm going to turn it over to him now and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Sure, and thank you very much for having me today. I appreciate that. My name is J.V. Hilliard. For the sake of this conversation, you can call me Joe. The JV stuff just looks good on the front of fantasy books, and I think it's a bit of an expectation sometimes in my genre for that. But as you mentioned, I am an epic fantasy author. My debut novel is The Last Keeper. It's book one in the Warminster series, with books 2 and 3 coming out in the middle and end of this year, with book 4 and the final episode of the saga coming out next spring or late winter. And I have a tendency to write in both epic and dark fantasy. So if you're a fan of things like Game of Thrones or Dungeons and Dragons or Lord of the Rings, you'll find, I think, a comfort level with the kind of stuff that I write.
Cool. Okay, so tell us a little bit about the book. What's it about?
Sure. So it's about a man who is a young man that graduated from the Cathedral of the Watchful Eye, which is a sect of keepers of this forbidden knowledge that's granted to them through varieties of prophecies. And for each person, it comes in a different way. And the main character, Damus Alaric, and that's my dog McLeod, yelling at somebody who's clearly outside. Damus, has a tendency to have his come to him through anaromancy or through dreams, very much like Edgar Casey, or folks that see things in the future through a variety of different ways. And in his case, his comes in the form of when he sleeps. And he starts to have a recurring nightmare of a returning fallen keeper, this man who is sort of the villain. His name is Grey Taurus the Mad. And he used to be part of Damus's sect, but used his power of prophetic sight in violation of the Erudian laws, the laws of their god, to better himself, to profit from it. And as a result, he was excommunicated. And there's my second dog looking out the window at the person. Hey, they wanted to get in. They heard we were live, and this is what you get when you get live. So, the two meet in their dreamscape and determine that they, to some degree, are rivals, and it's what Damus does with the fellowship that he pulls together to stop the fallen keeper from wreaking chaos on the realm.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the main character. I believe there's also another female character as well.
Sure. So Adeline Elspeth is a Vermilion elf, and so I've taken a lot of inspiration from Tolkien and the elves of like Shannara and Dungeons and Dragons, and put a spin on them. And the Vermilion elves are vermilion because of their color. They have red hair with red eyes, very crimson. In that respect, and they are the highest caste of elves. So many of the other elven cultures beneath them look up to them. They're almost deified in some kind of way, and they're seen as closest to their ancients, and their ancients are my term for gods. And Adeline is young elven diplomat who is sent to the human capital of Castleshire to learn under her father. And on the way there, she has an experience with a group of black unicorns known as tetrine. And that tetrine, when you see one tetrine, it portends of bad things to come. But in her case, she saw an entire herd of them. And it's what she does to not only steel herself for what is to come, but how she grows quickly into her role, and how she and Damus come together to defeat the coming evil.
Okay, so do you have any themes in your book?
I sure do. There's a variety of things. I think that in most good novels, you'll find things that are, in some cases, tropes, but there's often struggle, and it's how you overcome them. The unique struggles that our characters will face come from that. I also think themes like betrayal. You'll see that not only did Grey Taurus betray his own sect, but there are others in the book that betray, and can they be redeemed? In the same way Darth Vader makes his way back at the end, or does Grey Taurus continue down the path of non-redemption? And then there's forbidden love. I think Adeline falls in love with her protector, her champion, Sir Ritter of Vulcaneer, who is this trollborn. And in my realm, the trollborns are people of mixed blood. They're kind of like muggles from J.K. Rowling or Harry Potter. And they're in his case, he's half elven and half human. And so even though he is falling for her and she is falling for him, she's not allowed to be with him. And does she change her society's view on that kind of stuff? And does he overlook duty, which is another one of these themes that I think pop up in my book, where he is bound not to put himself in that situation, but also bound to help her? And can he suppress his feelings, or do they come together at the end? And that's to be determined.
Okay, so you mentioned prophetic sight. Is there any other magical systems in the world, or is it sort of more like fantastical creatures, sort of?
Sure. Well, it's a bit of both, and there's two magical systems that I've created. The first is sort of this magic that comes through divinity. The ancients in my world are sort of like the pantheon of gods that exist, that used to be in Warminster but left the terrestrial plane and have gone into the heavens, right? So it's called the Hall of the Ancients, where they live. Uh, and they deliver magic through prayer and supplication and work, and so there are groups like Damuses, the keepers of the forbidden, that have these dreams that come to them through their prayers. And then there is a more sorcerer wizard like magic that comes to people through learning. And so you can be sent away, kind of like the maesters in Game of Thrones, where you learn your skills there, but it's sort of like in the same way that you would find Gandalf finding it through study and learning and real wizardry or sorcery related spells. And so they come together there. But the realm itself has a number of fantastic beasts, as you say. I call them cryptids. They're rare beasts, and rarely are they the same. It's hard to find multiple they're almost unique in that respect. And so you'll find people that are like the Antlered Man, for example, is one of the bad guys. He's sort of a cryptid. Or the Skin Stealer, which is my version of a doppelganger, is also sort of a cryptid. But they're unique monsters within the realm itself.
Yeah. So did you base it on the creatures on a particular mythology, or did you sort of mix and match and pull what
I
you want?
mixed and matched. I took a lot of inspiration from Norse mythos, some from Greek, some from Indian, and it's just a sort of a personal hobby of mine. And what I found was that many of these creatures have been seen in multiple. You can see versions of them in multiple cultures. And so what I did was I created my own with inspiration from. So, like the Antlered Man, for example, is comes from a very Germanic legend of someone who controls wolves in the woods. It's like sort of this master of a hunt. In this case, there are no wolves. He's the wolf. He's this creature that has been kind of created with this, osseous maw and this skeletal head that has wings on it and goat-like hooves, where he runs on all fours, but also can stand 10 feet tall. And so I've tried to make them unique, something that I haven't seen in other fantasy novels or even TV shows or movies. But I've tried to borrow from existing myths that have inspired me to do so.
Okay. So what was the hardest scene that you had to write in the book, or type of scene?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think the hardest thing for me, I'll answer that in two ways. I'm a debut novelist, and for my day job, I write a lot of nonfiction. I'm a lobbyist in DC, and so my day job it takes on its own sort of realism. But I'm writing legislation, I'm writing policy, I'm writing advocacy papers, and when you're doing that, the closest thing I come to prose or dialogue is speech writing. And so, I had to learn pacing, and I had to learn how to write dialogue. And I think what I thought was a great first draft, I turned into a professor friend of mine, and she brought it back and said, "You really got to pace this out better. You got to do some things with your dialogue." And so over the course of that, I think I've gotten better, and I will continue to get better. Those things, and those are the most difficult things from the outside. Internally, I think writing romance is a hard thing to do. I mentioned pacing before, and at first you don't want to have this sort of like instant love between the characters, but oftentimes that happens. You'll see people and you're instantly attracted to them. But I think as you're building out a series and you've got 4 books to fill that void, you want characters to come along in a way that's not only believable, but then the reader falls in love with them falling in love. And you want to do that. So you don't want to have these crazy insta lovely kind of situations that pop up. I think it's something that I've had to learn to do, especially with Adeline and Ritter, finding a way to make their awkward, forbidden love fan those flames. As it's always fun to do the things that are forbidden, right? That's the thing you want to do the most. And in this case, they've got a chance to do it, but they also know deep down inside is probably not the right path to go down. So you add a layer onto the romance that currently exists there, and hope that attracts readers to the next book and the next book and the next book.
Yeah, as regular viewers of this channel know, I agree with the fact that romance is tough to write.
It just is, right? I mean, you try.
Yeah, all the respect to romance writers.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what was your favorite scene or type of scene that you wrote in the book?
So I think and again, I'll answer that in 2 ways. I think my favorite scene is the prologue. As dumb as that might sound, it's the origin story of the villain. And I think it gives a sort of a peek behind the curtain to what happened to Grey Taurus the Mad, why he became mad. You don't get it all, but you get that glimpse, and you're like, what happened? I want to know more about why this happened and why this went down. And that happens to be my favorite scene in book 1, only because I think it sets the tone for the dark fantasy side of the book, and why he does what he does. And people can get a sense that, he wasn't always a bad guy. So what happened? And I want to learn more about that. But I think the best scenes that I write, I think I write battle scenes well. So I would say some of the action scenes, and some of my readers have told me they really enjoyed my naval battles. Others have told me they've enjoyed, there's a specific battle called the Battle of Rilophane's Meander, which one of the main characters, Ritter, shows off his prowess with a longbow and kind of saves the day. And I think that those were a lot of fun to write. And I do enjoy that because I think that they can be anything you want them to be. And, I want to show readers a different side of fantasy battles that they might not have seen in all the Lord of the Rings movies, or something they haven't seen in the sort of Shannara stuff that ran on TV a while back. I want to show them something they just haven't seen. So there's a bit of realism in it, and there's a lot of military strategy that goes behind it. And I even sprinkle in some sci-fi. This is where I get I tried to, once a book, add something, because this is just my own pet peeve. I've read a lot of fantasy over the years, and what I found is there's never really any advancement in those societies, right? It always seems like, even though there's 1,000 years of Game of Thrones, they're still using swords and shields. So, like, for me, I try to create a new, believable medieval weapon that advances a scene that helps a good guy versus a bad guy. So there's a city called Abacus, which is a city of scholars that has something called the High Alden, which is kind of a pentagon. So I've kind of used my day job and bled that into my side work, and used some of the technological advancements I see the government do to provide for the common defense or promote the general welfare, taking those same concepts, and once in every book I kind of sprinkle that in, and that satisfies my sci-fi geek side of what I do.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about the world's not advancing, especially when you've got fantasy wars going on, because war often advances the technology in quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, it's one that, it's not that look, I love fantasy. I love sword and sorcery, and that's what my readers will expect. That's what fans of the genre want. And you don't want to give people ray guns and bombs.
Yeah.
But by the same token, in medieval battles, there was Greek fire. In medieval battles, they used quicklime. In medieval battles, they had more than just trebuchets and ballistae. They had these weapons that you don't see. So what I wanted to do was steal some of that out of our own history and twist it into my fantasy stories.
Yeah. In my fantasy world, though, they do have an excuse for not advancing because they don't have a lot of gunpowder. So
Well, there's no gunpowder in
yeah,
mine
because
either. Now,
I realized halfway through the series that they didn't have guns, but they had cannons
ah,
because it's a naval fantasy. And I'm going, why wouldn't they have guns? And then I go, aha, it's because
yeah,
they don't have
yeah.
gunpowder.
Well, that makes sense then. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In my case, like the era of the archivist, that hasn't happened, nor will I think it will ever happen. But I've got some fun things for readers to discover as they get into the series.
Okay. So, what about your secondary characters? Are any of them sneaky little scene stealers?
Oh yeah, I have two. I've gotten more compliments. This is I don't know if it's the same for you, but I've gotten more compliments on two minor characters, including one. There's a character I've made out. Imagine if there was a hobbit that was on steroids that had a big blue tattoo, like face paint tattoo on his face, and the race was called Spring Heels, and they were able to jump in the air very high and jump around, hence the name. Um, and Blue Connie is this barbarian berserker hobbit on steroids, right? He's got all these muscles and he rides a war dog, and someone wrote to me and said, I want you to write fan fiction for your own novel about the story of Blue Connie. I want to know more about him. And he sometimes steals the scene because I use him as comic relief. Like he'll blow some things up right before there's this tense thing. He's kind of my comic relief guy. And then on the flip side, I've gotten a lot of compliments on one of the assassins. There's a villain, a bone elf that's named Incanus Druaith, and he is like, almost like singularly focused on hunting vermilion. And you don't know why in book one. You find out a little later in books two and beyond. But he becomes Ritter's foil as Ritter is trying to protect the princess. He's trying to kill the princess. And a lot of the readers' responses to that have been they remind him of like a fantasy Boba Fett. And so I've gotten a lot of people saying they like them, and so I've written more with them in books two and beyond because people have told me that they like the characters. But I also know that they are minor characters. They can't take over the book, but they can take over a scene or two. So
Yeah.
watch out for Incanus Druaith in books 2 and 3.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what companion novels are for, I say. So.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Okay. So, what are your characters afraid of?
Well, it depends on who they are. In Damas's case, he has to learn to mature. He's an 18-year-old. He's no longer a boy, but he's not yet a man. And in his case, he has this, almost quest forced upon him. He didn't ask for it, but he's the last keeper. He's the lone keeper of the forbidden that keeps this knowledge, this connection with their ancient, and therefore a lot falls on his shoulders, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. So he's afraid of not only failing for his sect, but also he's got this menacing arch villain that he doesn't know why this guy's after him. It doesn't make any sense. Like to him, he hasn't made that connection yet. I think in Ritter's case, it's a fear of failure. Not only does he not want to fail his own slice of the kingdom where he protects the borderlands from the cryptids from the Dragon's Breath Mountains, but now he's, sort of this erstwhile hero who's been forced upon him to protect this princess that he doesn't know anything about, but he also knows he can't be falling in love with her, and he is. In Adeline's case, does she live up to her father? Her father was a great ambassador, and her aunt is their version of a queen. I call them a coronel. And she runs the Vermilion Nation, and she now one day, may be the own coronel. And can she let down her own people? And does she go to try to save the realm while endangering herself? And so she struggles with those things, and in the case of the villain, Great Taurus, he fears losing. And in his case, it's a bit of revenge, and it's not gaining that revenge before he loses his chance to get it. And so I think that there's a lot of motivation for the main characters, and I try to build relevant stories around them, things that are happening, whether it's a coup within a certain kingdom or barony, or some magical thing that they don't understand in the beginning, things that are putting pressure on the pressure cooker, and making them perform, and they don't always beat their own fears.
Okay, so you obviously write fantasy, and you mentioned before the interview started that you were sort of dabbling in horror. So are there any other genres that you want to try in future?
Yeah, I have in me, I think, a really good idea for a great vampire novel. It combines a bit of the contemporary with the gothic. It also takes a different tact on vampirism. I know that there was a real big uptick in vampire stuff for about a decade. Sort of culminating with Twilight and Underworld and all that kind of stuff. Whether it was through comics or whatever, but I want to write, I think, a one-off vampire novel at some point, and I've got the plot for it. It's ready to roll. I'm just afraid of screwing it up. As stupid as that might sound, I want to be a better author when I write that, because I want that to be my masterpiece if I'm going to have one. And so I think I've got the plot, the characters, some surprises, twists on vampirism, that combine horror with thriller with the gothic. But I want to get better as an author before I tap into that. I don't want that to be the first thing out of the gate. I want that to be the masterpiece down the road.
Cool. So we've got something to look forward to.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
Yeah, sure. So my website is jvhilliard, HILLIARD.com. You can also find me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at JV Hilliard Books, and then Facebook at just JV Hilliard Author. And then my paperbacks, my ebooks are all available almost ubiquitously on through many distribution channels. And I also have an audiobook of The Last Keeper, so you could find that on places like Audible and others like Apple Books that carry audio versions of my novels. You can get it directly from my publisher at Dragon Moon Press, or go on to Amazon or Barnes and Noble and find it there.
Okay, great. So I do have his book linked below as well as his website, so you can check it out if you want. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
No, thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to coming back for book 2.
Okay, so that's it for this show, and be back next weekend for another guest. And that's all for now. Bye.